Tonight's debate has been organised in association with Energy for Humanity. So before we go any further, I'll just quickly hand you over to Grosse, who is from that organisation. He'll give you a quick introduction about what they do and what's their goal.
Thank you, Harry. Good evening, everyone. I'm really happy to see so many people from my network, our network, from Energy for Humanity, private network, etc., especially Unabhängigkeitspartei, UP Partei, the Libertarian Party we have here, a young party, but very speaking out. I hope they will contribute to a lively debate tonight. And I also want to say hello to Economy Swiss, Kurt Land, Simon Rieder should be here. I haven't seen them yet, but they might be somewhere behind. And also Kurt Spierig from Life Fair, the Nachhaltigkeitsforum here in Zurich, and many other people I'm very closely working together almost on a daily basis. And then quickly to Energy for Humanity. As you see, we have a panel here. We are a very young environmental organization with a different approach how to actually going to solve climate crisis and the energy crisis worldwide. Co-founded by Robert Stone, the film director of Pandora's Promise, a pro-nuclear documentary, which I also organized together with some help of some friends here, the premiere in Switzerland 2 years ago, and the environmental campaign with Kirsty Golden, who is from London, and the philanthropist, Swiss philanthropist Daniel Ageter, who unfortunately couldn't join tonight. I'm the co-founder of the Swiss chapter of Energy for Humanity. So we're basically a local organization. We want to build a grassroots movement here to rethink and gather the people who want to have an alternative to the current environmental organizations. And if you want to know more, find us on Google, on Twitter, on Facebook, or energyforhumanity.org. Thank you for being here, and please contribute to the debate. It's an open debate. My opinion is not necessarily the one of the panel, but we're organizing this. Thank you.
Thank you, Luz. As I mentioned, we try to provide a range of topics, and we also try to provide a range of speakers who will give very different opinions, contradictory opinions maybe, but certainly ones that will get you interested and hopefully prompt you to ask your own questions and challenge the panel. Our moderator this evening is Sabine Beppler-Spahl. She is trained as an economist, but she's actively involved in the Friedrich Institute in Berlin, which organises Berlin Salon, so similar kind of events to this. So I'll hand over to Sabine.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right, okay, I'm going to switch this on. So, are the Greens the friends or the enemies of progress? I think that's a very interesting topic. We're going to surely have an interesting debate. I just want to support what Urs said at the beginning, and that is that we plan to have an open debate. So I will get the speakers to speak first, of course, but once they've done their introduction, I will go straight to you, the audience, to see if you've got comments or questions to make. And I hope you do, because otherwise I'll be stuck up here and I have to ask all the questions. So just get your questions prepared for tonight. I think the green movement or the green mindset is probably one of the most successful movements we've had, certainly in the country where I come from. So we've had a very successful Green Party in Germany. Greenpeace is quite a big, wealthy international organization. And if you compare that to 40 years ago, you can really say something has changed. But the Greens themselves have also changed over the years. So the time when the Greens were sort of sitting, knitting their own pullovers or, not carrying plastic bags, are, I suppose, over. And now Green Party members are praising the cities and modern technology. And these are the topics we want to talk about tonight. Is there such a thing as a modern green movement? What does progress mean? How do we see the green movement? I'll now introduce our wonderful panel. I'm very pleased to have such, I'm sure we're all very pleased to have such very good speakers. I'm going to introduce them in the order that they will be speaking, and I will start with Professor Dr. Silvio Borner. Professor Borner is Professor Emeritus for Economics and Politics at the University of Basel and Program Director of the Summer School for Law, Economics and Public Policy, which he founded. He is also a senior advisor at Hoffmann & Partner, and he is a regular columnist for Die Weltwoche magazine. He has taught economics for over 30 years, with spells as visiting professor at Stanford University, Vancouver, Buenos Aires, and Sydney. So thank you for being here, Professor Borner. Our second speaker is Thomas Vellacott. Thomas is CEO of WWF, World Wildlife Fund in Switzerland, and I see that he's been a member or a supporter of the WWF since he was 8 years old. So a very engaged person. He holds a degree in Arabic and Islamic Studies from Durham, in International Relations from Cambridge, and in Business Administration from IMD. He previously he worked in private banking for Citibank and as an engagement manager for McKinsey & Co. So thank you for being here, to you too. Our third speaker is Stephen Tindale. Stephen Tindale has 26 years of experience working in various roles within the energy and climate sector, and I see from the page I've got here that you also, that includes the position as Head of Communication and Public Affairs for RWE, which is why you know such a lot about Germany, so I found that out for that too. He is also the Executive Director of Greenpeace UK and Chairman of the Greenpeace European Unit. He's currently, yeah, I said you were, I did say was, but he's currently Director of the Alvin Weinberg Foundation, advocating innovation and delivery of safe, secure and sustainable nuclear power. Right, okay. So, and our final speaker, last but certainly not least, is Daniel Ben-Ami. Daniel has worked as a writer for over 25 years, during which he has contributed to numerous national, specialist and international publications. His book, Ferraris for All, was published in 2010. I've read it. I can highly recommend it to everybody. It's a very good read. His first book, or another book he wrote, which was published in 2001, titled Cowardly Capitalism, was recommended by the Baker Library of Harvard Business School. Daniel writes regularly for the Financial Times on wealth, and he is his speciality is equality, I suppose. Anyway, so yes, Professor Borner.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I will be very brief because I really came here to debate specifics about Swiss energy policy. So let me just make sort of two general remarks. One is, economic growth is rather recent. I could show you a graph where for about 2,000 years mankind stayed in the Malthusian trap, and where about the income per head that we had in 1800 goes back more than 1,000 years before Christ. So something dramatic happened around 1800, and I think there are three basic reasons for the Industrial Revolution. One is, and that has to do with energy, that we stopped relying only on human and animal horsepower, let's say, and biomass, which is wood and other things. We started using coal, we started using oil, later electricity, and so on. That's very important. So never forget this. If we go back to biomass, that may be also going backward in other ways. Second thing is we had a technical revolution, starting with the steam engine. Mr. Schwab now has the fourth revolution, digitalization and so on. And the third, and that is for me the most important one, is that we change from a subsistence, self-reliant production and consumption to market economies. So keep that in mind. And my position is that the Greens are not really appreciating what all this has brought about. The second thing is, that goes back to my old age. In the late 60s, I just had finished my PhD. The Club of Rome came, and meadows with the limits to growth. And I studied this, and I came to the conclusion that this is about the most stupid thing I had ever seen. The most stupid thing. It was a model, it was huge publicity, but for an economist, prices, there were no prices and no technical progress. It was just sort of a calculation. How much oil do we know is in the ground now? How much do you use every year? So in 1985 there will be no more gas left, and in 2000 there will be no more oil left. This is, for an economist, this is ridiculous, but modern doom forecasts still rely on the same thing. It's not the quantities, ladies and gentlemen, it's the prices and the values that matter. And maybe a third point, if I still have, from an economist's point of view, the distinction between renewable and non-renewable energy is a false dichotomy. Because energy, I learned 60 years ago in high school, cannot be produced and it cannot be consumed, it can only be transformed. And when you transform it, you lose some waste, But the thing is, even wind and the sun have to be transformed in, let's say, in work, And in order to do that, you need resources. You need resources which are also non-renewable. So let me conclude, the more we move away from high density to low density, the more maybe we use sun and wind and so on, which send no bills, but the more we use other resources and waste other resources. And in the case of Switzerland especially, we lose a lot of land again, but I think that's, my time is up. So it just gives you a first impression of where I stand.
Okay, thank you. All right. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you heard it before. Before I joined WWF, I was with a company called McKinsey. And I remember well when I decided to join McKinsey, and I told my friends about it and my family about it, and the reactions were rather interesting. Especially some of my more left-leaning friends were rather shocked. In fact, they were more than shocked. They were disgusted. And you have to know for this was the time when an infamous Swiss sociology professor by the name of Jean Ziegler had stated in an interview that people working for McKinsey were no different than people working for the SS in Nazi Germany. My girlfriend at the time was studying sociology, not with Jean Ziegler, but at Zurich. But some of her friends made it very clear to her that it was time to break up with me. I'm glad to say we're still together. We've been married for 15 years. We have 2 children, so they didn't succeed. But that, to me, was a really interesting experience, how those people reacted, because they all knew me. But when I said I was joining McKinsey, I was basically saying the same thing as I'm becoming a Nazi. When I left McKinsey, another interesting thing happened. I told my colleagues about it, and again, very revealing reactions. Well, some of them thought I was joining the World Wrestling Federation. But those who knew which WWF I was joining, some of them reacted very negatively. Because for them, there was really only one of 2 explanations of what I was doing. Either I had gone mad and was joining a band of long-haired, Jesus-slippered hippies, or else I was a filthy traitor. who was betraying the creed of the market economy that I was supposed to uphold. So there you are. I've had my fair share of stereotyping, being accused of being as evil as a Nazi and as spaced out as a hippie. You'll gather I'm not a great fan of stereotypes. We use stereotypes to reduce the complexity of the world around us to something that is conveniently simple. If we see the world as a collection of stereotypes, we don't have to bother to try and understand the different facets of a situation. Instead, we can simply apply timeless and placeless principles about the people we meet, be they McKinsey consultants, Greens, or Muslims. At the end of the day, the assumption of the stereotypist goes, at the end of the day, deep inside, they're all the same. So, with its reductionist logic, for me, stereotyping is little more than intellectual laziness. Stereotyping is a leftover from the past. It was particularly strong during the days of the Cold War. Back then, it was clearly us versus them, with a wall and several million troops separating us. If you came across someone, you knew whether they were friend or foe because you were safe in your ideological trench. I come across less stereotyping these days. Maybe it's a result of generational change as the Cold War generation retires. So I was rather surprised when I got an invitation to debate whether Greens were the friends or enemies of progress. I was rather intrigued that someone would use the term Greens in the 21st century, because I've worked with people active on environmental issues in over 30 countries, and I can tell you there's very little in common between these people. We don't get a little green book, and we're not asked to memorize and repeat a common ideology. So who are these Greens we're talking about? Or maybe it's Paul Polman, the CEO of Unilever. He might be called a Green because he's committed Unilever to get out of fossil fuels over the next 10 years. Maybe Elon Musk is a Green. He successfully launched an electric car company, and he sits on the board of a solar company. He also launches rockets into space, though, so I'm not sure if he qualifies. A Chinese blogger fighting pollution in Beijing might be called a Green. She's concerned about her child getting sick from pollution and wants to do something about it. Or a farmer in Tanzania who engages in human-elephant conflict mitigation in order to be able to farm better. Also a Green in many ways. Well, what I can tell you is all these people are in some way engaged in the environmental field, but their experiences and beliefs cannot sensibly be reduced to a stereotype of what it means to be green. So I'm looking forward very much to the debate tonight to see if we can actually just debate a subject like the economy and the environment without resorting to cheap stereotypes. If we divide the world into greens and non-greens, then we're very likely to miss some really important stuff that is going on at the moment. For example, we're very likely to misinterpret what governments agreed on when they came up with the Sustainable Development Goals last September. For the first time in human history, all nations agreed to a shared set of goals that apply universally to all countries. These goals come with measurable indicators against which states, but also companies like Credit Suisse or organisations such as WWF are reporting their progress. If you divide the world into greens and non-greens, you are very likely also to miss the tremendous shift in attitudes that is happening in the business world when it comes to the environment. I already mentioned Unilever getting out of fossil fuels. One might also point to IKEA, who announced last year that they were sourcing 100% of their cotton from sustainable sources. And by 2020, they will be sourcing 100% of their timber from certified sustainable sources, and 100% of their seafood will be coming from sustainable sources, and they'll be buying 100% of renewable energy. Or you could point to Toyota. Not many people noticed that. People were rather caught up with what VW did in September. But in September, Toyota came out and announced a time-bound goal to reduce the vehicle emissions of their cars by 90%. That's 90. So what's going on here? And it's not just individual companies either. There's the We Mean Business Coalition, which unites businesses and investors in support of ambitious action on climate change. in line with the Paris Agreement. Their members have over $7.5 trillion in annual revenues, and the investors in the coalition have $20 trillion assets under management. And finally, if you look at the world through an ideological lens, you'd miss what we are seeing today in terms of a totally new way of cooperation across sectors. WWF, for example, partners with companies such as Coca-Cola or China Vanke, the largest real estate developer in China, to jointly address environmental challenges such as climate change. So if we see the world through ideological lenses of friends and enemies, we will continue to fight yesterday's battles. However, there's a more attractive alternative, and it's unfolding as we speak. People are leaving the trenches and cooperating across divides like they never have before. Together, we are working on the big problems of today, like poverty or climate change. And together, we can solve them. Consider this an invitation.
Thank you. All right. Stephen.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, as Sabine said in the introduction, I have been a campaigner for a long time, and one thing I've always been told as a campaigner, and I've tried to tell myself, is always give a clear answer, yes or no, no beating about the bush. I'm afraid, in thinking about what to say tonight, I have to give a rather less clear answer. It depends. It depends which Greens you're talking about, as has just been said, and it depends what is your definition of progress. The Greens are many, many strands. There is no such thing as Greens, as my colleagues just said. There are some eco-centric Malthusian Greens who basically don't like human beings very much. But they are very, very few. In fact, I would say I've only really met one in my 26 years working in this field. So yes, they exist, but they are not the mainstream Greens. Most Greens that I have met, and we've just heard this, are very much in favour of making human life better in all sorts of respects. And they may talk about wildlife in the sense of that being important in its own sake. They also talk about it being important for human existence, partly because we depend on bees and so on for pollination, and partly just because human existence is better if we're surrounded by beauty and not surrounded by concrete. So Greens are broadly pro-humanity. What is progress? Well, I'm speaking for myself now, and I am a Green, I suppose. What is progress? Some progress is good. Some progress is absolutely essential. Reducing the number of children who die before the age of 5, that seems to be progress that everyone should support, and one of the SDG goals is that, isn't it? So there is lots of progress that is absolutely essential. There is some progress that is frankly meaningless. Economic growth, for example. If there's an enormous industrial spill, that can be good for economic growth because it costs such a lot of money to clear it up. So economic growth is just about transactions and money. Is it good or bad? We don't know. It depends what the money is being spent on, what is being achieved. So economic growth is frankly irrelevant, in my view. But there are several things, like reducing people out of poverty, which may or may not require economic growth, which are essential to progress, in my view. So, my experience of the Green movement that I've had, Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth I've worked for, is that they are not anti-progress, they are not enemies of progress, they are just wrong in key issues. They're not wrong because they're evil people, and since I was wrong for 20 years, I can't say they're evil, I suppose. But it is about these fighting the old battles that you just mentioned. And the old battles in Greenpeace's case were against nuclear and against genetically modified food. Now, nuclear, I think we need to come out of the trenches and say nuclear is not good or bad. There are some aspects of nuclear that are bad. Nuclear bombs, for example, I think have no place. And Switzerland is a good example of a country that has managed to have nuclear energy without having nuclear bombs. Germany was the same until they ditched it, unfortunately. So nuclear bombs, bad. Nuclear energy, good. Existing nuclear, pretty good. But advanced nuclear, the next generation of nuclear power stations, can be even better. They can be even safer. They can reduce the proliferation risk to very, very little. And they cannot melt down because they're already molten. So the safety issue is much reduced. And it should be possible to sell that and to make people see that that is part of a 21st century, technologically sophisticated, exciting form of energy. GM crops, there are good GM crops and there are bad GM crops. If you make something pesticide resistant, lo and behold, all pesticide is used. That's kind of not rocket science, is it? And the trials that I was involved when I was working for the UK government in setting up showed that. We knew that it was going to show that, but Tony Blair, Prime Minister at the time, he insisted on having the trials just so we had the scientific evidence that if it's pesticide resistant, farmers use more pesticide. If, however, it is pest resistant, you don't need any pesticide. That seems to me to be a sensible way forward. And then there's golden rice, which is vitamin A enhanced rice. Hundreds of thousands of children go blind in South Asia in particular because they don't have enough vitamin A rice. If they don't have enough vitamin A in their diet. Having rice that stops them going blind, that seems to me a good thing. And because it's being developed on philanthropic money, Rockefeller Foundation, I think, that is not going to be patented, and therefore it is going to be widely available, and it's not sterile seeds, it's going to be there year after year. So that is a form of good GM. So I think absolutely we need to move out of the trenches. We need to say the old battles, the 20th century battles, were important, but they are over. We now need to address the issues of the 21st century. Growing global population, climate change, the desertification and the effects that that is going to have on growing land, the amount of land there is available to grow food. And therefore, because climate change and because of the need to feed a growing population, we need to be prepared to abandon, even if they have been long-held, lifetime ideologies, and be prepared to think afresh. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Well, I want to put my cards on the table at the start. I think Greens, in all of their different guises, are, without doubt, the enemy of progress. Some of them might be very nice people, rather than creepy Malthusians who favour controlling population, who are a very small minority. But Greens are the enemies of progress in all different guises. But I think before understanding why I think that, you need to explain what characterises Green thinking, because that hasn't really been discussed on the panel. All the panel members have really shied away from it. To me, what characterises Green thinking is the idea of a natural limit. That human beings have to limit themselves, limit their ambitions, limit their ideas, limit the impact they have on the planet for the sake of the environment. And that idea, by the way, is in the Eco-Modernist Manifesto, which I have read and I recommend you read too. That too, in a kind of supposedly enlightened form, also accepts this idea of we have to accept limits. We have to limit our humanity for the sake of the environment. So to be very clear, I'm coming from a different perspective. I'm coming from what I would say is a humanist perspective. In other words, whatever questions that we look at, whatever issues we decide we want to prioritise to campaign around, they should be looked at from the perspective of what is good for humanity. Whereas the idea of green thinking is we've got to limit ourselves. And so, to be absolutely clear, green thinking, in my view, is not about a few fringe green parties. Green thinking now is absolutely mainstream. It's mainstream in business, so in this I agree with some of my fellow panellists. It's mainstream in business, you can see it in Swiss investment banks even. It's mainstream in governments. It's mainstream in international organisations like the United Nations and their awful Sustainable Development Goals. So when I'm talking about green thinking, to be clear what I mean by it, even if other people might mean something different, is the idea that there should be limits to humanity, people should limit themselves for the sake of the environment, and it is a completely mainstream view. It's not about a few campaigners. Now, it used to be completely clear that it was a completely reactionary movement. I mean, as Stephen completely rightly says, those kind of old-style Malthusians who just say limit population, humans are horrible, we have to have fewer of them, they are pretty creepy and completely and overtly reactionary.
Very rare.
And absolutely, very rare, very rare. What has come to the fore since the 1970s is that argument has been flipped around. So the argument is not to, as Stephen rightly says, to say humans are bad in that overt way. It happens in a much more covert way where the argument is that consumption is bad. So indirectly it's an attack on humanity because it's saying humans are bad because they consume too much. And because by consuming too much, they damage the planet, they damage the environment. They don't see that, in fact, rising levels of consumption and rising economic growth, that has actually been key to our prosperity. So it's not a coincidence, for example, that in China's been incredibly successful in terms of raising people out of poverty. You know, hundreds of millions of people have been raised out of poverty in China in the last 20, 30 years. It's not a coincidence that that has happened at a time that China has grown very, very rapidly. That is economic growth precisely that's provided the mechanism for people's lives to get better and for so many people in China to come out of poverty. Whereas those people in Africa, for example, who have followed the kind of UN mainstream view that they have to make development sustainable, they've been much less successful in terms of coming out of poverty. The idea of sustainability, in fact, is very interesting because really it's a kind of code word for a kind of permanent austerity and keeping the lid on economic growth and prosperity. So the idea of sustainability, I've given lectures on this topic, it really came to the fore in the 1980s. There was a key report by Gro Brundtland, who had been the Prime Minister of Norway, and made this report to the United Nations where she defined sustainable development. It was really about focusing on the essential needs of the poor. That's paraphrasing what she said in her report. And it sounds very good, you're concerned about poverty, you're concerned about their essential needs. But what it was really saying was, well, we'll just focus on the most extreme forms of poverty, the most extreme forms of suffering in the world, but implicitly, and it's not very far beneath the surface at all in the Sustainable Development Goals either, saying, well, yes, we'll try and get the most poor people out of poverty, but the goal of having prosperity for everyone, which was the kind of classic Enlightenment goal of making everyone better off, of having everyone having the same standards of living that we have in the West, that is very much derided. How can you possibly have high living standards for everyone? How can you possibly expect to have economic growth so that everyone can have the kind of standard of living that people in Switzerland enjoy? That is very much the argument, the kind of green argument. It's still very strong. And it sounds very positive and anti-racist because you're not doing it because you don't think that black people or yellow people should have Western living standards. You're doing it because you're concerned about the environment, and you're doing it because you're concerned about sustainability. But really, although it might not be put in nasty, old-fashioned Malthusian terms, because very few people do that, it's actually, in many respects, even worse, because it uses the nice politically correct language, but it has the same kind of consequences of saying that people need to limit their ambitions, limit the standard of living. It's something that is entirely regressive. So I would argue Greens are not only the enemy of progress, they're the enemy of humanity and the enemy of modernity. So those people who believe in modernity should ditch green ideas, should ditch environmentalism, and should support a humanist perspective on the world.
Wow, I think we're going to have a debate here tonight. I think there's huge amounts of questions which have come up just... oh, have I gotten the microphone off now? Is it me who's got it off? Sorry, okay. There's huge amounts of questions which have just come up just in this panel already. Can we talk of Greens? Is there such a thing as good or bad progress? The Club of Rome, I thought was very interesting, wrong about almost everything, but people say, well, they were wrong with numbers, but perhaps they were right in their general direction, saying things are limited, energy is limited. I'm going to get you in a second. Can I just see, is anybody here wants to speak first from the audience? Yeah, all right.
Very short.
Yeah, short is always good.
I want to do not use a word you can't define.
Pardon, I couldn't understand. Say it
Do
again.
not use a word you can't define.
Right.
Only one member of the panel defined the word progress, the central word here, and another member of the panel used it very strongly, but didn't define what he understood under progress.
Okay, I think that's really useful, because that was one of my questions too. What actually is progress? And I think perhaps we can concentrate on that a little bit up here. So, yes, Professor Borner, you wanted to say something?
Well, I think I said what I meant. Mankind was trapped in the Malthusian situation for, let's say, 2,000 years. And then it took off, and growth, of course, we measure it by the GDP, and this is very, of course, well, it's income and so on, and you can ask yourself, how do they spend it and so on. But if you take all other indicators of well-being, of life expectancy, of the health of people, even their happiness, it correlates very, very closely with traditional economic growth, very closely. And, I was in Bhutan to study because Bhutan said, we don't want economic growth, we want happiness of the people. And you know what I found? The ruler family takes the national income and leaves happiness to the poor people. That's what happens. So, even now I go one step further and say economic growth has caused some environmental problems. I would not deny that. But like the Greens, going back to some romantic, natural, ideal state is ridiculous. Mankind has one limited resource, and that's our intelligence, our inventiveness, and we have to make progress sort of in the traditional way in order to solve the problems. And let me just say one thing about the poor people. What is really bad about our attitude, let's say the green attitude here, is that we say, maybe we made mistakes, we shouldn't have, we went too far, so please, don't make the same mistakes. Now go to India and tell that to people. They say, 2,000 watt society, what kind of luxury problems? If you want to go back to 2,000 watts, we don't care, but we don't want to stay there. So this is really the main point, and so growth is progress. There are many dimensions of progress, but traditionally measured growth is a good indicator of many other dimensions of progress, of well-being. There have been, the United Nations has made many efforts to define other indicators and so on, but as I said, they correlate rather well with the traditional measurement of growth. And maybe another thing, that the limits to growth, that certain resources are physically limited, is economically irrelevant. Because there is, or energy, there is no really shortage or scarcity of energy. It just takes resources to transform the energy into work. That's the problem. And energy is not really scarce. Or when I said, but if you want to store electricity in batteries, then you need lithium. Where does that come from? Is that a renewable resource? No. But then the same people say, there is enough lithium. Don't worry. Well, there is enough of everything. And if things get scarce, then the price goes up. And if the price goes up, human intelligence will try to find alternatives. And human intelligence will try to save on energy. The Americans use much more energy per head than we do. Well, because the gasoline is about 3 or 4 times cheaper than it is here. So that's what I mean. There is a lot of adjustment through markets and through human intelligence, which makes me sure that we will solve these problems. But if we stop growing, then I think we won't solve any problems.
Okay. All right, so we've got this debate up here already, because you said growth was not positive. You say progress and growth are interrelated. We can't separate the two, but I've seen 3. Wow, this is good. Back there, yes? No, was it? Yeah, sorry, yeah.
To me, the problem is the market is not working. There are $490 billion of support to fossil fuels, and according to the Institute of Energy, and if you include the human cost of that, it's $5 trillion compared to $135 billion for renewable energy. You also make the statement you cannot create energy, but the solar energy becomes both photovoltaic and wind, arrives on the planet and arrives free. When you transfer coal, you make CO2, and you are saying we've done some damage to the environment. The IPCC is now saying we will definitely go to 3 or more degrees centigrade, and that will have catastrophic effects on the whole of humanity.
Okay. All right. Shh. We do have a chair here, so. All right. You had your hand up?
Yeah, my question is more of a general kind of way. We talked about.
Oh, is it me again? No.
We talked about the actual words that built the title of this debate, which is Greens and Progress. And I think it's important to define them. I think you gave kind of a very narrow definition of Greens, which I'm surprised, because I think you're an economist and you're not? Okay. Well, let's say to me, one green idea of thought would be to take externalities as an economic concept into consideration when we talk about the company. When someone produces some sort of emissions or damages the environment, that's an externality, and maybe there should be a price on it, because you're making well-being of other people's, and to me that would be part of progress, less enjoyable. And I would like to hear your point of view concerning that. If externalities would not be a green idea that actually favors progress.
Okay.
In the sense of everyone should be able to enjoy the environment without externalities of others.
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to take... Yes?
There clearly should be taxes on externalities, but the politics of that is impossible, certainly in the EU and in the US. So people who say carbon tax is the only way forward on climate change are kind of ignoring political realities. In an academic world, yes, that is the best approach, but in the political world, it's not doable. But I wanted to come back to this, what is Greens? I mean, the two colleagues at the end have both said things that I fundamentally disagree with. Do we want to go back to pastoral idyll? No thanks. I'm a Londoner. I don't mind weekends in the countryside, but then I go back to civilization. And you said we Greens want limits in order to protect the environment. I said nothing about limits. It's about doing things differently. Yes, coal was great for the Industrial Revolution, but we now know the damage that coal is doing, so we need to move on. And that is why advanced nuclear is part of it. And limits to protect the environment, you said. I didn't say anything about the environment, I don't think. I care about human beings. I care about kids not dying. Is that an environmental issue? Not to me it is.
Okay, right, yes, here, in the front. Yes, you, lady. Do we have a microphone?
Okay. I cannot speak from a scientific perspective, but I do want to share my surprise at how some characterizations happening tonight. I'm hearing this speaking about Greens in this kind of having this idealistic perspective of just going back to the land. And in fact, what I'm hearing tonight, and I must say, if there's stereotypes being projected at me, I fall into diverse ones because I'm a consuming American and my home is on pure solar energy. I catch my own rainwater, pump it, and I'm completely off-grid.
You're not supposed to exist.
I'm not supposed to exist. So, but what's fascinating to me and is interesting to kind of be in dialogue with is I'm hearing this idealism around economic growth. I'm hearing this idealism that you're for humanity, as if that's ideologically different than people who are environmentally oriented, that they're not for humanity. I hear the word environment taking on a tinge like, oh my God, it might be a bad word. I didn't say anything about environmentalism. Well, I'm saying something about environmentalism without fear about that. And the interesting thing is, you know, if we were all for progress and the betterment of humanity, you've got this idealistic thing, you've got infinite creativity, you've got infinite intelligence, but you're not addressing how human beings today are applying their intelligence and their creativity. And some of it is beautiful, and there's a lot of it that's not idealistic, and there's a lot of it that is damaging humanity.
And you judge who is who.
No, I'm just saying that I would like to be addressing the issues and representing what you're representing, but this whole thing of putting it in this one package that all environmental progress is actually progress is questionable. Some of it is and some of it isn't.
I think that's clear. So it's basically
So
also
that's
the
my
point is there good and bad progress? Okay, thanks. Thank you very much. Any more hands? Okay, I'll take one more and then I'll give the, yes? Down here, the young man.
Yes, I can.
Wait a minute.
I'll speak lively, otherwise. I just wanted to flip the question of the debate around and ask whether, in order to be Greens, do we need to have progress? We look at a lot of the economies around the world, and it is the most developed ones that are experimenting with renewable energies. And so, in order to be green, do we need to have progress first?
Okay. All right. So I'll let... Who was going to speak on the panel here? You wanted to say something, yeah, okay. Okay. First you, and then I'll take.
So this idea of progress, and I think first of all it's really important. Progress, well defined, is a good thing. And what does well defined mean? Well, we can all have different opinions on that. The fascinating moment in time that we are right now is that all the states of the world have come together and come up with a definition of what it is, and that's in the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, we may not all agree with everything that's in there, but it's actually a pretty good attempt at balancing and including things like social aspects, health, as well as environmental things. So let's stop this putting things into boxes and say it's either good for growth or it's good for the environment. A word on limits. again, we're being very simplistic by saying, either it's limits or it's not limits. There's different kind of limits. I fully agree that there are some things that have no limits. Human imagination, the possibility to develop new solutions. And that's where Malthus went wrong when he thought that agricultural productivity was just going to be a steady thing that's not going to progress. Because he didn't take into account that you could actually get more productivity out of a hectare of agriculture. Fully agree. Let's push ourselves that a lot of these limits are inside our heads and nowhere else. But there's a second type of limit, which I'm sorry does not come from Malthus, but comes from ecosystem science, which is, take fisheries, for example. You can increase the productivity of the world's fishing fleet, and you know what happens? They're going to take more fish out of the ocean, so you're, productivity, growth. But you go beyond a certain point, and you're taking out more fish, then the ecosystem can renew, and the populations are going to collapse. Now, that's exactly what happened with cod in the second half of the 20th century. And 25 years after the collapse of northwestern Atlantic cod, those populations have not come back. And guess what? 3 billion people worldwide depend on oceans and coasts for their livelihood. So let's not forget that. And let's not make this dichotomy between growth and progress. And finally, this argument is incredibly Western that we're having here. It's a real shame we don't have someone here from the South or the East. I do a lot of work in China. We work with the Chinese government on a lot of these issues here. Now, the Chinese have grown hugely. The Chinese have lifted 680 million people out of poverty in 25 years. Superb job. The Chinese have realized that they're also, with their current coal-based model, killing 4,000 of their citizens a day through air pollution. So guess what they're doing? They're adjusting their model and they're moving out of coal. Now, is that environmentalism? Are they Greens? No, it's just smart economic policy. And subsidizing fossil fuels, we heard the figures before, 5.3 trillion going into fossil fuels worldwide. And this isn't Greenpeace or WWF saying this is the IMF. And as long as we pay that kind of money to cement the current structures, don't talk to me about markets. That's not markets. That's favoritism for a certain industry that is cementing its profits.
Okay. Right, so here we are. We do have limits. And Daniel, you want to say something? Could you also say something about this thing about couldn't it be good for both the environment and for humans? The bee example we had, saying bees are good for humans and nature's good for bees and so on. So is there are we maybe making up a tension? Okay.
I mean, I think one of the challenges with this discussion is you have different levels of question, by which I don't mean good and bad questions. I mean different kind of levels of abstraction, some philosophical, some much more practical. So on externalities, I'd say it's a lower level of question, not criticism view at all, but it's not that kind of philosophical question, although it is an important one. And I think what people often forget in relation to externalities is that although they can be negative, so for example your car produces pollution when it drives around generally, but also there are huge positive externalities. That's one thing often forgotten in the discussion. So mobility, for example, the fact we can fly all over the world and drive to many different places expands our horizons and has huge positive externalities. So I think that discussion is very one-sided because the positive externalities are often forgotten and Greens tend to focus on the negative ones. On the question of the guy in the back who's desperate to talk again, I mean, progress, I was using economic progress, really focusing on economic progress, but I think it is worth thinking about the ultimate goal of what we want to achieve, particularly if, like me, you define yourself as a humanist. And for me, the ultimate goal is the full development of the individual. A free individual who can really do what they want to do. They're not constrained by scarcity. So the reason economic progress is important is not because economics is everything, but it's because until you abolish scarcity, until everyone has a reasonable standard of living, then they cannot be truly free. So economics isn't everything, but prosperity is a precondition for people to be truly free. That's the way that I see it. Finally, on this question of limits, I mean, I did not define Greens in terms of people who want to return to a rural idyll. I think it's a completely fair description of Greens to say they believe that we have to be constrained by natural limits. It's certainly there in the Eco-Modernist Manifesto, whether you agree with it or not. It talks about how we need to limit the impact of humanity on the planet, although a lot of the practical things it says I very much agree with, but I disagree very much with that kind of thrust to it. And it's very much there in the notion of sustainability, which is just thrown around. The idea of sustainability is a conservative idea in a very literal sense. You can see it in Edmund Burke, who really was in many ways the founder of conservative thinking. Because what Burke argued, if you look at his reflections on the revolution in France, he said that you have to understand society as a kind of intergenerational contract. And the current generation needs to limit itself for the sake of previous generations and future generations. And that is very much there in the idea of sustainability, because it basically says we as individuals in the present have to limit ourselves for the sake of our children, for the future. That is very much how sustainability is posed. So it's thrown around as a practical notion. Actually, it's a deeply ideological notion. And it is really about holding ourselves back. We're not saying, well, there may be problems, but we as humans can solve those problems. But we have to constrain our ideas, constrain economic growth, constrain our desires. I could say a lot more, but I'll stop there for the time being.
Okay. All right. So, yes, back there, and then I'll take you in. Sorry. Yeah, just one.
I'd like to comment on Mr. Vellacott's court example. Depletion of courts. I'm sure that for non-economists, this is a very impressive story. But since I'm an economist, I find it unfair to use this story against the market, because this is one of the oldest examples of market failure known under the name of the tragedy of the commons. So I find it unfair to use this to criticize the market.
Since I'm directly challenged, can I respond to that?
Well, just 1 second. We'll collect
Are we having
first.
a debate or are we not having a debate? Well, okay.
1 second. Just one. We are having a debate. So just okay.
I find it interesting that this side of the panel always uses the word limitation. I've heard it very often from both of you. And this side of the panel uses the word balance. And I think that's the core problem, because you see limitations where I practically see something was out of balance for some time, and now certain people are saying, well, maybe your side isn't wrong, and we need to keep that intact, but maybe your side has been missing something, and something has come out of balance. And this was a word you used, and I thought that was very good, the word balance, because I think it's a core problem.
Okay. Can I see some more shows of hand? We do have a limited time here.
There are no limits.
So we're talking.
There are
We're,
no
we're
limits.
talking about time limit.
They're all in our minds.
I was
The
going to make
limits.
that point. So, but from there, yes.
I associate progress with freedom, and I wanted to talk about freedom because you brought it up, and then also ask you a question. It seems like one of the premises of environmentalism is that humans have an impact on their ecosystems. We need to learn how to better interact with our ecosystems to preserve them, right? So when you're talking about human interactions with an ecosystem that touches every person, and apparently, the argument is we're out of balance. And so how do you get into balance? And the way you get into balance is by control. And in order to have control, you also have to have the instruments of control, which means state control. And those instruments of control are susceptible to abuse and takeover. And I think that there is an association, I think, in my mind with the environmental movement of this sort of desire to sort of, many different political strains are sort of piggybacking on environmentalism, because who's against environmentalism in principle? I think, that's would seem fairly universal. Maybe people are too busy, we're thinking about their job to worry about environmental issues. But I think if you ask people if they had their ideal world, it would be an ecologically balanced one. So I wanted to ask the question about, how do we achieve the goals of the green movement without implementing some regime of control? And how do we protect our society and preserve the freedoms when we have a mechanism for control that's touching every aspect of our lives?
Right, okay, thank you. So I'll take one more person, because, oh yes, okay, back there, yeah. Or was it, oh, okay, no, back there, I meant the gentleman back there. I'll take you next, sorry.
You have to be quick here.
I won't.
Okay, well, my name is Oswald Giro, I'm from Green Life Society. I've been working on this organization for the last 28 years. And I've worked in 42 different countries on many social and environmental programs. Now, when we talk about Greens being a progressive or non-progressive on development, I would say progressive, because if we weren't, we'd still be in smog, and we'd still be having plastic guttering our rivers and everything else that goes on with this kind of thing. So it has to be progressive. It can't be the other way around. And when we look at the Greens that this side of the panel discusses, it's like I'm going back in 1970s with that kind of discussion of what is a green. Yeah. Actually, we're practitioners. We don't see the world as a problem. You know, the world will exist anyway. It's just that we won't. That's the problem. As long as we keep on polluting ourselves, as long as we keep on destroying ourselves, as long as we keep on destroying the environment around ourselves, we won't exist. So we're progressive in the sense that we are survivors. Now, in this discussion on this panel, it seems quite certain that it's something to do with religion. You know, Judeo-Christian people believe that they control the environment, they control the animals, that they are conditioned on this earth to look after everything else. Well, in my background culture in India, we are one with the environment, we are the same. We are not high or low. And this is a part of an understanding that we have that the West simply doesn't have. It's because you don't see yourself as part of the whole system. You see yourself as an important part of a system. A bit too important.
Okay.
And this part of this thinking is wrong. And you have to learn how other people in the world think.
Okay.
Because it's not just how you go about it, it's also how we go about it. Just imagine if India, with 1.2 billion people, destroyed the environment like Australia. 20 million people in Australia. Look at how much damage they did to the environment. Well, you look at India with 1.2 billion, we still have the forests, we still have the deserts, we still have the savannas.
And it's dirt poor.
We have a lot of things that we still have different philosophy, a different kind of philosophy.
Right. Okay, I think that was an
like
interesting point.
We are sitting on the chair and we will destroy this chair, or we are on the earth and destroying the earth. So, like, where is the progress in this subject?
Right. Okay, these are very, very good.
The definition of greens a bit, the definition of greens a bit limited because you say, okay, greens are.
Hang on a second. I did have, wasn't
Power to
somebody?
The people.
Yeah. Okay, here in the front. No, we're trying to be fair here. Yeah. So we're trying to be fair, going according to.
I'm going to speak for you.
Right.
You've got the mic. Keep it.
Guys, thanks for the wonderful discussion. Thanks for the moderator. Thanks for the mic. My name is Akash. I obviously come from the green side of things because, why wouldn't you? Daniel, first name basis. Just a straight up question. You were very clear that greens impose limits, and you seem to imply that these limits don't exist. Now, I understand that I may be on the plebeian end of the spectrum of your questions, but if you will indulge me, could you please just address it? And I thought the example Thomas gave was great. Fisheries have a natural limit, right? You can overfish, you can make populations go extinct. This occurs. Now, this is a natural limit. Do you accept this natural limit? If you accept this natural limit, then do you accept a limit on temperature, and so on and so forth? And then do you simply accept limitation, or do you think limits don't exist at all? And if so, please address the fishery question.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Are we still remembering all these points? Are we still okay with the points? Because I'm going to take some more. Every speaker is going to have the chance to sum up at the end and sum up his points. So I'm going to take 2 more from the audience, and then I'll let the speakers back in. So who had his hand up? Yep, you, and then I'll go back to the panel.
Also from India, and while I would like to point out that while we do have all of the ecosystems, the forests, we also have the world's most polluted city. So I think that pollution is sometimes a price which comes along with progress, and I think it's a necessary cost of progress, which is otherwise helping people in poorer areas. Speaking about fish farms, since this seems to be, well, about fisheries, I guess people haven't really considered fish farms, or I don't know, I seem to have missed this point altogether, because you can create artificial ecosystems from where you can farm fish, like you farm plants, and this point hasn't been brought up at all, I think, in this whole discussion.
Okay, that's very... So, it's fish, not bees. I wanted to talk about bees, but anyway, so back there, yes? Yeah, no, yep. You there.
So I'm also from India. I'm a biotechnologist over here at the ETH. I just want to bring up again on the fish and the whole thing about there are natural limits. There really aren't if you consider historical fact and consider that we have new technologies. So like 3 weeks ago there was a new salmon introduced in the US which grows at 3 or 4 times the rate of normal salmon. There's genetically modified food, but the Greens can't have it both ways. You cannot expect to reject new technologies and then expect them to also, to have fresh salmon from the sea and avoid genetic modification or new technologies.
Okay, thanks a lot. So does anybody here on the panel want to come back? You were dying to speak? No. You want to say something? You don't have to. I mean,
I want to. No, I was just wondering if I should have maybe answered the questions which were posed to me. But I don't want to insist if you'd like to do this differently.
I insist. So there was a question directly to you, a cod. You
okay, fish.
Yes.
Fish. So cod. Please get me right. The cod example, I never said the cod example showed that markets are wrong or markets don't work. I said nothing about markets there. I just said fisheries have limits. That's all I said. My experience with markets is I'm not anti-markets. Markets can work brilliantly as long as you have the right conditions. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't because you've got externalities that have not been priced into it. So it's not about markets or not markets. There are brilliant solutions out there, and we have several hundred partnerships with companies where they do voluntary action, which is not enforced by government, but because they want to do it. Companies that are acting to show what's possible. So please don't turn the environmental argument into an argument about markets or not markets. That's not fair. That's not what it's about. On fish. Yes, fish farms, good one. We have actually thought of that. We've even come up with a standard called the Aquaculture Stewardship Standard, which we co-developed. The thing you have to look at with fish farms is that in most cases, the ecological footprint of a fish farm is actually larger than if you catch the fish in the wild, because a lot of these species, especially salmon, are being fed by fish that's been caught from the oceans, not with vegetables. So please, if you bring up fish farms, that's fine, but please go the whole way and actually look at the supply chains of the fish farms as well, because then you're looking at the whole question. This is not about markets or not markets. This is not about technology or not technology. This is about smart growth rather than dumb growth. And if you kill your citizens because you pollute your air, I don't think that's smart growth, and that has nothing to do with putting the environment above humanity or anything like that.
Okay, smart growth, dumb growth. Okay, Professor Borner.
Can I respond to?
No. Oh, you wanted. Oh, yes. Okay. All right.
Thank you. 2 points on India. The polluted cities in India, which are, I know, terrible, they are a result of progress. Yes, I agree with that. But you used the word necessary. they were not necessary to secure that progress, and they certainly are not necessary. It's not necessary to keep them deleted in order to keep progress going on. I've just recruited a woman who's working in India to promote advanced nuclear power, small modular reactors, because they would be a good way of cleaning up the air in India, as elsewhere, and therefore delivering progress without the pollution. So I think it is not necessary. But somebody asked about control. Do you Greenies want to control everyone? Well, Edmund Burke, as was said, he talked about a contract between generations, caring about your children. I think you said it was an ideology to care about your children. Well, if that's an ideology, then I'm guilty as charged. I'm an ideologue. I do care about my children. Yes. Margaret Thatcher, not a control freak. She was dreadful in most respects, in my view, but she gave a very good speech on climate change at the Royal Society in September 1988. It's on the Thatcher Archives website if you want to read it. So Thatcher, Reagan, George Bush Senior, they all wanted to control climate change, not to control people. They weren't reds under the beds, as far as I know.
Right, okay. So Burke and Thatcher. What, Professor?
Well, no, I think it's unfortunate to really focus on the fisheries, because fisheries is a renewable resource. You know, if we talk about the limits of growth from meadows on and all these peak guys and everything, it is resources, you know, which are on the earth in a physically limited way. And also this footprint stuff, always only focus on that. And, you know, as an economist, we know a long time about the tragedy of commons and about the destruction of forests. You know, before the British dug out their coal, they destroyed their forests. You know, so let's not talk about renewable resources which are destroyed because the markets don't work there. So we have to find solutions. The same is true for water. Nobody talked about water. For me, the biggest problem of the future will be the water. And you know why it is such a big problem? Because basically it has no price. So we are wasting water in terrible ways. So we have to have a price. And the same is true for climate change. If CO2 is really causing climate change, which is not so sure, let me be prudent. Second thing is, it's even more uncertain whether we can have an influence on climate by reducing CO2 now, because all we know for sure is for the next 30 years it's going to increase. The emissions are going to increase. So then the CO2 has to get a price. And it's a global problem, so we either have to find some kind of a tax system for CO2, or we have, is my better proposal, or is my option favorite, or we have to find some cap and trade. And let me finish with one thing, you know. In Switzerland, I have looked at the Canton Basel-Land. They have a program to reduce CO2 by renovating houses and so on and so on. You know how much, and I take the figures the government gave, you know how much it costs to reduce a ton of CO2 in such a way? 250 francs. And this is ridiculous. You know, we could reduce the same ton for $7 or for $5 in India. And that is the challenge, that we find a way, if we want to reduce it, that we don't reduce it here, where it's already at a ridiculously low level, so that we reduce it there. And one final point about China, you know, if you were really serious, Of course, China wants to get out of coal, but they go into nuclear.
No.
Tell that. Oh, no. Listen, there is one person here who knows that. Of course, we read about how they invest in. They also invest in solar. But the only way they can get rid of coal on a big scale is nuclear. And the Germans say we get out of nuclear and they produce more coal than ever before.
No, that's true.
No, it's not.
It is true.
2014 figures it's not.
Okay, anyway.
It's
So,
reduced.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that Greens just really want to focus on the practical matters. Greens don't like talking, generally speaking, about philosophical and conceptual matters. They just like talking about the practical things, because once you start drawing out the assumptions and the consequences of the idea of limits, you see how completely reactionary they are. So, for example, Edmund Burke didn't talk about caring about your children, which is not at all what I said. The idea was that society was an intergenerational contract. Therefore, we in the present have to constrain ourselves for the sake of the children. In fact, in my view, it's a very cynical manipulation of people's desires to try and get them to constrain themselves in the present. That's what's really going on. And it's not true that it is part of Indian culture that they have to live in harmony with nature and respect the environment. That might be your preference, and that's fine. You're entitled to have that preference. But that is a mainstream green thought through the ages. I remember visiting Gandhi's house, Mahatma Gandhi's house, or one of his many houses, in fact, in Bombay. And as well as his huge collection of those spinning wheels, he seemed to have some kind of consumerist obsession with cotton spinning wheels. Very, very interesting to look at his bookshelves, because they included Western green writers like Thoreau and Tolstoy and H.G. Wells, people like that, are very much influenced by those Western ideas. Or even, I've just read a biography of Alexander von Humboldt, the great German scientist of the early late 18th, early 19th century. He had this idea of the Naturgemälde, the kind of picture of nature, that everything is connected. And, you can easily draw the conclusion from that what we need to do is constrain ourselves, to limit ourselves. Now, if that is your preference, that is fine, but say that is your preference. It's not because people as a whole believe in that. In fact, most people don't like that. That's precisely why Greens are so coded in what they say, because most people don't like austerity. Most people, certainly in emerging economies, want higher standards of living. But Greens don't want to talk about that. They want to use weasel words like sustainability to hide what are their real preferences. Just finding what do I mean by limit. There is a difference between a challenge and a limit, or a problem and a limit. I think there can be environmental problems. There can be problems of pollution, for example. London historically had huge problems of pollution, but through economic growth, it managed to solve those problems. The River Thames was filthy, it had cholera, huge problems London had, but economic growth gave it the means to solve those problems. The idea of environmentalism is to say, not that we have problems, but that we have limits. We cannot solve those problems. We've got to rein ourselves back. That is the real thrust, the real core of green thinking.
Okay, so... Yep. Am I back there? Oh, yeah.
Okay. So I promise I will not talk about any fish. So, hello. So in many ways I could be considered a green because I'm vegan, I care about the environment, I try to protect it, I really support that we should do things against pollution, both dirty and greenhouse gases. But whenever I go to work or when I'm with my coworkers, I really try to avoid that label. Because you see, I'm a nuclear engineering researcher, and the word green, like just the color itself also, but just the word, it really makes us cringe, because in our eyes, we associate it with people climbing to water vapor emitting cooling towers of nuclear reactors with a poster saying "Stop CO2," which just gets us confused. We associate it with people burning GM crop fields, which are actually used for research only to see if GM crops are actually safe or not. And we associate just people going against science in general, or just against facts and not trying to still look for evidence. We associate with people who say that Chernobyl killed millions of people. It didn't. You can look up the UN reports. And this kind of behavior. And, for this, I really am afraid of the label, and I'm hoping that my coworkers who are here will forget this quickly, that I'm saying this. And that's why I will say that I appreciate Thomas's efforts to diversify this label. And I guess it's part of why the whole question we're discussing here is a bit, I guess, controversial on purpose, so that it can make people like us cringe and say, of course Greens are enemies of progress. They burned the field, they climb on our cooling towers and made us shut down. Well, in reality, shouldn't we just pragmatically, work towards finding better choices for making more with less resources, saying that, oh, look, coal sucks, let's replace it with nuclear, or coal with capture, or even natural gas, or, solar and wind in situations when it's applicable, but with the pragmatic approaches. For me, this is like being green and being environmentalist, not necessarily discussing the ideas. The idealism of going beyond capitalism and beyond focusing on GDP, which, those are great discussions, but environmentalism, I don't see the connection.
Okay, right, okay. So I can't say there's a compromise. There was a hand back there up for a long time. Yeah?
Hi, I think Daniel Benoni is right that the Greens are absolutely the enemies of progress, and I think that stems also from the idea of limits, but also from the idea that nature is above or equal to man himself. And I think that's where our humanism must kick in, to place man infinitely above nature. And I think that's where the eco-modernists go wrong, because they're a bit like Matt Ridley, maybe, who says we should all go into cities and live in cities because it's good for nature, not only for us, but also for nature. And I think that is not necessary, because what should be our prime concern is the well-being of humans, and not nature. Nature is secondary or not at all to be considered in these matters, because normally what is good for humans is also good for nature. But placing the emphasis on it being good for nature to such a degree as eco-modernists do is not very wise from a humanist perspective. And I also think that, I think Stephen Tindale said this, that to alleviate the suffering of the poor and abolish poverty, we don't necessarily need economic growth. So what you're basically saying is poverty is not materially determined by material circumstances. For example, if someone has, a lot of facilities like in Switzerland, as opposed to India, where people have to live on the street, don't have central heating, blah, blah, blah. But what you're actually saying is that poverty is something psychological. So what you're saying is...
No, that's not what I'm saying at all.
I would presume that you're saying...
Well, you would presume wrongly.
You will have a chance to get back, so let him finish first.
Those who presume that to alleviate poverty, economic growth is not that important, but the happiness of the poor is more important. I think the poor should be unhappy, fundamentally unhappy, because they are poor. And the only way to alleviate their unhappiness is to make them rich for economic growth. And that is the only way. And that's what we need.
Okay. So, can I see who would still like, who wants to speak? So we've got, because we are coming to the end of this debate. Yeah, okay, back there.
Yeah. In the beginning, we had a short argument about what is green. I think we have an institutionalized green movement in the Green Party. So when I read green, I first think of the Green Parties. What do they represent? What is their program? Where are they on the political scale between right and left? Now, we in Switzerland, according to political scientists, we have the most leftist left in Europe. And the Greens are left
of the socialists.
Far left of the Social Democratic Party. Now, I come to my conclusion. The Greens, institutionalized in the parties, they might name environmental problems correctly, but it's a misconception to think that they have the right solutions. And this is a misconception that is very popular. And this has to be emphasized. The Greens don't have the right solutions.
Okay, all right. Yep.
Okay, I believe we reached the statement stage, so I'd like to do 2 statements as well. Human nature, and we're talking about human nature and why human nature is beyond nature or whatever, seems to be excess. And my understanding of civilization always was to limit that excess and find a way where people can live together without killing each other or going back to some supremacist ideas. So accepting the limits of our life, and that might not only be ecological or economical or ecological things, is part of our nature. So if we say there is limits, and these limits might prove challenging, and we might grow based on that, that's a very normal approach. So I would say that ecology or ecological thinking is long-term economy. Wrong way around. So economy should be, if we really consider the long-term impacts of it, should basically lead to an ecological approach. So we limit our resource usage, we try to improve the quality of what we produce, we look into the allocation of goods. That's all economy. So I see no issue with that. And it's not even a philosophical question. It's just basically what makes living with other human beings more easy. It limits conflict. So I really don't see why this furor is there, the Greens, and they want to limit. It's very old school, and I think we're far beyond that.
Okay. Can I just see who else wants to speak? Just hands up, because I'm wondering, because I need to sort of get the speakers in their last round. Anybody who still wants? Okay, so I saw a hand there. I'm going to get back there. Right, yeah, a lady. Just get up and just get up and shout.
So I just for both parties actually, because you both actually said that you want to be, that nobody actually will be poor, so you both are for humanity. But what is your solution actually? Like, what would you do? Because at the end, it's not clear what you actually think, how you can do something without pollution or without progress. And yeah, so I just would like to know what you would do.
Okay. So maybe what I'll do is I'll bring the speakers in once more, and then I'll go out to you for the last time. So last points, and then I'll get the speakers in for the final round. So I'll just, whoever wants to answer questions here on the, yes, you had your hand up for a long time. Okay.
Yes. Okay. I am very much in favour of prosperity, just to be clear, and that will require more money, poor people having more money than they have at the moment. My point was that may or may not require economic growth. It could be delivered by redistribution, for example. Economic growth is not a bad thing, but it's not a good thing either. It's an irrelevant thing because it just measures economic transactions. There may be a correlation between economic growth and social progress. Yes, so economic growth is not bad, but it's not all we should be measuring. We should be measuring social progress. And Tim Jackson wrote a very good book, Prosperity Without Growth, which if you haven't read, I recommend you read, because it's very sensible. Just on the professor's points, I mean, does CO2 cause climate change? Well, probably. 97% of peer-reviewed scientific publications say yes. Could it be wrong? But 3% could be correct. Isn't it worth having an insurance policy? Seems to me, yes. A cap and trade system would be better than a carbon tax. Well, it might. Actually, the EU has a cap and trade system. It's rubbish because of the politics. And as I said in my earlier question, internalised externalities, carbon price, great in academia, doesn't work in the real world. And reducing emissions in India or somewhere else rather than in Europe, yes, that already exists under the clean development mechanism. what are we going to do? Far too late to start on that. All of the above, basically. We need to do all clean energy systems. That's why we need to come out of the trenches and say renewables are not better. Well, renewables may be better, but we need all of them. We can't make the best the enemy of the good. So we need carbon capture storage, we need nuclear power, we need renewables. We don't actually need all renewables because some of them are bad. Cutting down Amazon rainforest in order to burn the wood, that is renewable, but it's not good renewable. So we need to be a bit more sophisticated. And my final point, who was it who said we should be pragmatic? Yes, absolutely. If I had to define myself as anything nowadays, it would be a pragmatist. Let's just do stuff that works and get on with doing all of the above.
Right, okay. Anybody here still want to go back to that? Yeah, Daniel?
Yeah, if I can get this to work. Is it working now? Okay, I mean, a couple of things. I just find what Stephen says extraordinary. I mean, he does like to be pragmatic, but then he contradicts himself, so maybe pragmatism is to his advantage.
Sorry, I missed that.
But I think that economic growth, no one talked about how you measure economic growth. I certainly didn't talk about it. The point is that economic growth, having more stuff, is a precondition, has been a precondition for huge improvements in human life. Both, the living standards, longevity, amount of education, modern medicine, modern schooling, electricity, planes. I could go on and on and on. It depends fundamentally on economic growth. That is not incidental. It's not some kind of arbitrary correlation. Economic growth historically has been absolutely central. And we still live in a world where billions and billions of people live in poverty. And unless we have economic growth, those people in real terms, their lives will be constrained and impoverished. To me, that is absolutely clear. Climate change, actually, yes, it's true. Most climate skeptics even accept that human activity can change the climate. That's a completely uncontroversial statement. What is being said by the Greens, again, often in a coded way, is that because the climate might be changing, what we have to do is to curb our consumption, accept the limit. We have got to become obsessed with recycling, we've got to consume less, we can't have economic growth. And I don't accept that. I think to the extent that climate change is a problem, and I accept, there's a big argument, there is some problem there, but we can solve it through technology, through our ambition, through the application of human ingenuity. So we don't accept climate change as the limit, which is the kind of holy grail of contemporary green thinking. We can say, okay, if it's a problem, we can use our ingenuity to solve it.
Okay, I'm going to get last points. Yeah. Right. Questions, points, and then I'm going to get the panel to sum up. Did you
I don't want to sum up.
One second. Got him first, and then you.
No, I insist. Professor, please.
No,
Okay, sorry.
No, but I just want maybe with two examples. Most people now worry about the people dying in Beijing from pollution. That's bad. I don't like that, but who thinks and who cares about the hundreds of thousands of people who die because they live in homes without modern energy supplies and because they have open fires as the only source of heating and lighting, and they burn biomass, and they even burn cow shit and everything? That is all, this is all biological. This is CO2 neutral. But you talk to these people, we shouldn't be cynical and just worry about those who die from pollution. All these other people should get the chance. And maybe the last thing about the use of resources, finally I bought one of these things. And I learn now what it all can do, and help me thinking of what all this replaces. A typewriter, it replaces the telephone book, it replaces watches. It replaces so many things. So, you know, if we say, oh, we cannot go on with economic growth because this is no progress. This is a huge progress, you know, with saving inputs to get the same output. I'm working on a picture, you know, showing all these things. You know, tens or hundreds of kilos of material equipment is replaced by this one little thing.
Okay. Good.
That's great. I'm glad I waited because I can pick up 2 points which you mentioned, which are important. Cow shit and iPhones. Cow shit first. Burning cow shit is a big problem, and you're perfectly right. It kills millions of people the world over, and we should consider that. We actually have projects on 3 continents that deal with indoor air pollution, where what we're doing is we're using the cow shit, but they're not burning it anymore, but they're using it in biodigesters, and thereby reducing the indoor air pollution. So there's a lot more you can do with cow shit than you would think, even as Swiss people. On iPhones, technology is a wonderful thing if used well, and I'm a great fan of virtualization. If you read your books, if you read your newspapers, if you listen to your music through electronic means, you can save between 40 and 60% of the ecological footprint. Not everyone likes to hear that, but you know the figures are out there and you can look at them. So there's huge things you can do there, and we should celebrate that progress, and we should celebrate it when growth has positive effects. So let's not fall back into this dichotomy. There does not have to be a dichotomy. We can have smart growth that respects that we are on a limited planet, but that at the same time challenges us to go beyond those limits which are in our minds and nowhere else. I'm amazed by how some people here manage to define what the core of green thinking is, because I don't know what it is. Because if I talk to Greens, so-called Greens in China or in Africa or in India or in Europe, if I talk to Paul Polman, if I talk to people in Greenpeace or in WWF, I get very different answers. So how can we live in essentialism where we reduce such a variety of views to the core, and all we have to do is deal with the core? And let's not equate the Greens with the Green Party. I mean, I'm sorry, for goodness sake, we were there 30 years before they were. You know, Prince Philip and Prince Bernard founded the WWF before there was any Green Party around. So, you know, and you mentioned Margaret Thatcher, you know, let's not reduce green to a certain part of the political spectrum. That's a really, really reductionist, simplistic way of looking at things. It's a lot more than that. The key question was posed by the lady there: what do we do now? What would we do? And it's a pity we didn't get on to nuclear power, because I was looking forward to discussing nuclear power with Stephen. But the fascinating thing when we think about what we have to do is that whether you are pro-nuclear or whether you are critical of nuclear, a lot of the things you have to do to deal with decarbonisation are actually the same, identical. One is you have to invest in efficiency in a big way. Because if you want to replace today, 80% of the energy we use today comes from fossil fuels. If you want to replace that 1-to-1, either by nukes or by renewables or by a combination of both, you're doomed. But we're wasting about 40% of the energy uselessly, which we can reduce. So we have to go for efficiency first. Then we have to get rid of the subsidies on fossil fuels. If we don't do that, we don't stand a chance. And let's not kid ourselves. That is not markets. Sorry, that is not markets. That is special interests. So let's do those two things. By doing those two things first, and then we can have a long argument about whether it should be nuclear or renewable filling the rest, or a combination thereof. But a lot of it is actually the same, and that's what I was trying to say in my introduction. We can reach out, we can disagree on some things, but we can move forward on the things we agree and achieve terrific things together.
Okay. So, last questions. I saw There was a hand there. Are there any more questions? And then I'll get the panel in to sum up. Just very, very briefly, just main points. Okay, so here we go.
Hi. On my way here, I didn't encounter any dinosaurs. One of them didn't impede me or threaten to eat me. And so that tells me that one of the biggest myths that's been widely sort of talked in this room is that there's some kind of equilibrium in nature, because the dinosaurs disappeared quite of their own accord and somehow without the hand of man. There's no such thing as equilibrium within nature. That is an idealistic myth. Nature is vicious and it's very unequal. The second thing I want to say is to Stephen, and he put his thing about progress, and basically what he argued for, if I may simplify it, and forgive me for this, but you argue instead of growing more cakes, what we should do is redistribute or recarve up the existing cake. So if the people in India want to be a bit better off, we need to be a bit poorer. Whereas the way I see it is, I don't want their gain to be at our expense. I want to see a win-win where there is progress, where everybody progresses. I'm not an old-fashioned socialist that wants to carve up the cake at my own expense. Thank you very much. Let's make more of them. Now, my last point on, and this is to Thomas. Whenever we speak about the human footprint, we speak about the human footprint, which means us, by the way, that's you, the footprint in here. We speak about it as if we had less people in here, the human footprint of this meeting was less, that would be better. Or if it was bigger, it would be worse. And the human footprint itself is seen in negative terms. And that fundamentally betrays, I think, the inhumanity, the humanity-despising core of green thinking, that the human footprint is used as a word that's negative. Whereas the human footprint is a great thing. And, that's what we should be celebrating much more of, is, who we are, what we have become, and more importantly, where we can go.
Back there, yep.
Paul, I very much agree with your approach, your thoughts. I very much agree with that. I think what you'll find is there's a terminology now called the human handprint, which looks at the good things we can do and measures that against the bad things we do. So the footprint is bad, but the handprint is good, and we need to get that in balance and get more hands up to move forward and do things better.
Okay, then you had the mic.
Hello everyone. Well, there's been a question which there's a fact which is, I think, interesting, and it's that with the current population in the world, we're actually having a big impact on it, and even if the impact per capita is lower than ever, and we are so many that the impact is huge among all. I mean, primitive societies had a very, very big impact on their surroundings individually, and now apparently we are having a way worldwide impact. And the point is, first of all, I don't want to go into Malthusian scenarios, but among the redistribution of wealth, if not just take and move, talking about jobs and about how jobs could actually in the future disappear due to robotization and technology, and how would that impact those people who could not have the possibility to access, let's say, high education jobs and get part of the cake, which will probably remain in fewer hands in the future.
Okay, thank you. Then, next, the young man there.
Is it a sign of arrogance when people resort to laws as the first measure to solve a problem? So forcefully interacting with others and using a control system to, by a centralized kind of mean, dictate what they should do or shouldn't do. So, and are actually your arguments strong enough that they could even survive without laws internalizing the externalities? So maybe that's a little bit of a very radical libertarian perspective, but I think it's important that this is discussed.
Okay, I'll take 1 minute contributions, not longer then, because we have to come to an end here. So,
1 minute contribution, it is.
Yeah, that's great.
Sir, regarding on the side of the economics front. Thank you. Thank you, Grosse. Much better. just a note on that. I agree with you completely. No one should be using cow dung to be lighting up their homes. My grandmother actually used cow dung to cook. But it's way more effective to be using other forms of energy. You're right in that. Be it nuclear, be it coal, regardless of what. But the problem there is that there's very little reallocation of investment happening towards either greener energy or even nuclear energy for that matter. This reallocation is not happening. Why is this reallocation not happening? Market failure, as you pointed out earlier. Now, the problem with this market failure is to a large degree the lobbyists. And it seems to me that plenty of well-thinking economists, Greenspan, Bernanke, they simply aren't addressing the market failure which is occurring. It seems to be that the left is addressing the market failure more than the free marketeers. Now, while I agree with you, it seems that this market failure isn't being addressed. Thank you.
Okay. So 2 more. These are the, okay, back there, and then I'll get the panel back in. Yeah.
I wanted to thank everyone and quickly draw attention to the fact that we all share we have one thing in common. We're all idealists in this room. We either favor progress or we like green ideas very much, or some combination of them. But I just wanted to thank everyone. I think we've clarified the most important differentiations, and I've heard notes of interesting contributions, and I think we should just not forget that we're all in the, how should I say, that we're all in the same boat without trying to be pathetic. And I thank you all for this discussion tonight.
Okay. All right, that's a nice positive note. Then, one more here.
Yeah, I just have one point to make, which is, it seems to me that the one commonality between all of the different strains of green is that they're really prescriptive and prescriptive. And can you tell me why you would like to be so prescriptive?
Okay, right. So, time to sum up. I'm going to get the speakers in the reverse order as they were speaking at the beginning. So, starting with Daniel, then you, and then Steve, and then Professor Borner. Yeah. So, Daniel, go on.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think historically, if you understand it in proper historical terms, I think green thinking is conservative because it really came about as a conservative reaction to the Enlightenment. So in the Enlightenment you had a belief in the power of reason and human ingenuity and progress, and the Greens from Malthus onwards have said, no, hold on a minute, we've got to limit ourselves. So really, green thinking is conservative with a small c, not necessarily related to conservative parties. I've forgotten about the WWF being founded by aristocrats, which is quite funny and it's actually quite telling as well. And I don't know anything about the Swiss Greens, but they sound absolutely horrible. They may call themselves left-wing, but very different from what I would consider to be a truly radical tradition. Because I would define myself as coming from the tradition of the Enlightenment, left-wing, if you understand it in historical terms, certainly not related to the contemporary left. And so maybe to conclude, I think green thinking, by which I mean limited humanity, is the enemy of progress. I think what we should aspire to, as someone in the corner said, is humanism. So whatever question we look at, whether it's climate change, whether it's living standards, whether it's something entirely different, our starting point should be what will benefit humanity and how can humans solve this problem. I'm confident that if we start like that, from that starting point, we can solve the problems that face us.
Okay, actually it'll be Stephen now. Stephen, the other one.
Thank you. Anyone who wants to limit humanity is the enemy of progress. Yes, I agree with that. I don't know of any Greens who want to limit humanity other than the one person I mentioned who is an Arcadian. So I think we are talking on different planets, if I may use that cliche. Laws. Are we Greens prescriptive? Well, some laws are necessary. Even in Switzerland, some laws are necessary. It cannot all be left to people's goodwill, and it cannot all be left to the market, even if we had a cap and trade system or a carbon price or whatever. I mean, why, I think you said, why do they first go for laws? Well, Obama tried in his first term for 4 years to get a cap and trade scheme through Congress, failed. So he's going for laws because he doesn't have to go through Congress. That's just political reality. It's not because he's a trot. We got trot in the UK, but I won't get to that. Finally, we've talked all about fish. Now it's the end, so we can talk about cakes. I'm in favour of everyone having cakes. I am very much a fan of cakes in the economic wealth prosperity sense. The point about economic growth I made, some economic growth is bad, just as some cakes are bad. And it's also important not just to have lots and lots and lots of cakes, but to have them spread out so that everyone can eat them, and not some people gorging themselves to death. And talking of people going to death, at the risk of sounding like Marie Antoinette, I think everyone should eat cake.
Okay, so here we go.
Now I'm hungry, Stephen. So we've had a lot of very theoretical debate, not about fish, but about, is man part of nature, or is he above nature? I think in practical terms, when you actually talk to people on the ground in the projects we do, a lot of this kind of talk is pretty irrelevant to them, because in fact, if you do the right thing for example, flood protection, that's going to benefit nature as well as it's going to benefit the people. So again, there's a false dichotomy there between man and nature that we very often make, that if you talk to the practitioners on the ground, that's not the case. So it's worth looking at those examples. And I'd also like to pick up on the prescriptive bit. We've talked a lot tonight about what should be happening. I find it almost more fascinating to look at what is happening. And that's something that often gets forgotten in these debates. We are in the fastest transition that our energy system worldwide has ever seen. And a lot of people are not aware of it. We got the new figures out a few days ago from Bloomberg, where they looked at investments into the electricity system worldwide. And there were $330 billion that were invested into renewables. So careful about the statement that it's not happening. A lot is happening, and the funds are shifting. Last year, wind and solar added as much capacity to the global grid as all the other energy sources put together: coal, gas, oil, nuclear.
Capacity.
These are figures from Bloomberg. So it's worth bearing that in mind. So all the pessimists who all they want to do is talk about what should be, it's worth actually looking what is happening, and it's worth looking at some of the projections. The International Energy Agency saying by 2040, for example, renewables are going to make the largest contribution to our energy system. Things like that. It's worth looking at what is going on, because there's a lot of positive energy and we need to reinforce that energy. And that's where I'd like to come back to what I said at the beginning, which is about alliances. To me, the big difference between now and kind of the Cold War thinking of enemies and friends, the big difference is that today we can work together even if we don't agree on everything. I can't just work with people who are thinking and convinced of exactly the same stuff than I am, but I can actually go out and do really pragmatic alliances. We sit down when we talk about soy with companies like Monsanto. We get hell for it from other groups who say, you traitors, you shouldn't be doing that. There are cartoons stuck up on the wall of shot pandas with Monsanto written over them. We have wanted pictures put up on the wall for our employees because we sit down. We don't agree with Monsanto, but we talk to them, because there's a lot that you can do, whether you are pro-GMO or anti-GMO. There's a lot you can do together, incredibly much you can do together. And that, to me, is the essential difference today and why it's so exciting to be in this space. I often get asked, don't you get depressed working on the environment? No, I don't. We've never had this much movement as we have today. It's an exciting time to be alive, and it's an exciting time to work on these issues.
Okay. Right. Professor Borner.
I'm not really asking for applause because I'm a representative of the dismal science. And as such, I just want to tell you, yes, there is a lot of investment, in renewables, but the basic reason is because of the subsidies. Everybody invests where the subsidies are, and that again is going to be paid by the consumers and the taxpayers. The second thing I want really to say is I don't say what we should do. I say we should be careful in the Hayek sense that we admit that the generation tomorrow, they will be better off. And they will know much more than we do now. So we should not really plan everything for the next 30 years. If I look at the energy strategy of the Swiss government, they say exactly how many, 11.2 kilowatt hours from solar and 4.8 from wind. And not even the Chinese and the Soviets in their worst times never went over 7 years of planning.
All right, okay. Well, let's have a final round of applause for all our four speakers.